to exploitation.
Alright, good afternoon, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion today, starting oil painting The Death of a Salesman. And apologies to anyone who might have been out for garage art yesterday. It was cancelled due to traffic. I got there a little bit late and a fiesta was going on and in town apparently, and the cops blocked off the streets that allowed me to get to my gallery. So anyway, it will be open next week, Friday through Sunday, garage art in between Allsup's and Outback Pizza on whatever side of town that is on. But this painting here, actually it's going to be kind of a remake, or a remake of a painting that I did in high school in an English class for Ellen Swain, Death of a Salesman. And I don't know what happened to the original, but something did. Anyway, we will see what we can do to recreate the vibe that I captured in the original, which I was very partial to. And it's going to be kind of a looming cityscape over a single figure set on a bright yellow background. Right now I'm just going to hit the yellow background with some lemon yellow wash across the edge to edge on the surface of the canvas, and then line work with some Payne's Gray and Violet. So here we go.
The frontier of our species is the imagination. Now we have to take that slogan and somehow turn it into a technology. How can we go to the place where ideas come from? How can we somehow separate our architectonic fantasies from the ongoing momentum of the planet? Both are valid, you see, but we have to recognize that what we are is almost an ontological transformation of life. We are to life what life is to the inorganic realm, and we need to separate ourselves from the planet. The planet, the entire planet, should be a bioreserve. How many of these oxygen-rich, water-heavy worlds are there? Now, of course, it's pie in the sky to talk about moving all heavy industry into space or to the asteroid belt or something like that. But on the other hand, when you extrapolate a visionless future, even as much as 3 or 4 decades into the future, you see the accumulation of problems on such a scale that then there will be no pulling out of the power dive. Because once a society passes a certain point in the process of dissolution, you just don't make a decision to change. I mean, it's too late. You don't have the engineering skills, you don't have the technical community, you don't have the resource extraction ability. It's all slipped through your fingers. Well, I think psychedelics are catalysts to thought, to imagination, to understanding. And we are like somebody who has been dead drunk while the house was burning down around us. And now we have awakened to the sound of falling timbers and the smell of smoke. We have a certain limited amount of time to figure this situation out. We don't have 500 years or 100 years. Anybody who speaks in terms of solutions that require 100 years or even 50 years to implement doesn't understand the dynamics of the situation. History has some kind of will for its own transcendence, and I think we are now so close to the dropping of the mask and the realization of what the game was all along, that the sense of this nearby revelation informs all of our lives. I mean, drives our dreams, our thoughts, the choices we make, why we're here in this room this evening. It's very big news, I think. The world is not at all as we suppose it to be. I find that very amazing. I mean, that's the bottom line for me. I always think of these things in reference to that scene in 2001 when the anthropoid apes are leaping up and down and screaming and pointing at the monolith. That's what we're doing here in this room. I mean, the subject of this weekend is unspeakable. It can only be obliquely indicated. Whatever you say about it is not true. And yet it is somehow the informing mystery of being, and it is not remote. That's the big news. That the previous human model, which is that we are all poor, groveling sinners, and that gnosis will trickle down to us from the wonderful folks up on top of the steep building nearby where they're conducting mysterious business with liver readings and stargazing. That model is insufficient and insulting, considering the situation we have been brought to by those very stargazing men wearing dresses. So I think what we have to do now is just take the machinery into our own hands. It's a matter of personal responsibility to find out what the world is really doing, what it is. What do you think's going on? What do you think this is all about? Who do you think you are? What do you think English is? How do you really cognize notions like the future, the past, where I've been, what I want? I mean, it's in Moby Dick, Melville says, if you would strike through the mask. Everything is a mask. And just behind that mask lurks, well, what? That's the question. I mean, it's the thing which informs every individual existence, and that's fine, and people have always lived in the shadow of that mystery. But it is our weird privilege to live in an age where there is also to be a collective dropping of the mask, a moment of melting and recasting of what reality itself is to be. So, discussing this, convincing ourselves of it, and then working out the minute details of how it all is inevitable and couldn't be any other way is how we will occupy ourselves this weekend. I'm really conflicted always in these situations because I feel, for some reason, I suppose it's an ego trip, that I want to be correctly perceived. I, as a person, want to be correctly perceived. And I think of myself as a reasonable person, a person sensitive to concepts like evidence, causality, so forth and so on. And yet, what I have to say is like completely unreasonable. I mean, a messenger bearing news of complete madness approaching from all directions. So, and I got into that position by staying pretty close to the principle of skepticism. I'm not a believer. In fact, when the aliens draped the mantle over my shoulders, they said, it's because you don't believe in anything. This is why that's why you got this far, because you didn't believe in anything. And it's a good method. Normally it's a method spawned out of futility. You say, well, fuck it, I don't believe in anything. But it's also very good for getting rid of a lot of crap, because the real stuff can take the test of skepticism. The real stuff doesn't have to be bowed down before, and it works. It's on its own. The news is, and it's very hard news to get out because it's news about the structure of reality. The news is coming back from 50, 60, 100 years of anthropologists, ethnographers, geographers, botanists, dealing with the most quote-unquote primitive people in the most remote parts of the world. The news is that reality is not at all as we imagined it to be, and that our prowess in the technical sciences is simply a cultural artifact, an accomplishment of ours. Some people do great tattoos. We send spacecraft to the stars. But it doesn't mean we understand anymore. And in fact, the evidence is building that our style of society is the historical equivalent of a temper tantrum. You know, that it has no viability. It's completely self-limiting. It's destructive. And it hands nothing on to its receivers. So I sort of talk to this group, and all the groups that I talk to, from two points of view. I'm trying to convince you of something, and yet reason dictates that I assume that you're already convinced, pretty much. So then it's also an effort to figure out what it is we're so convinced of, and then what is so great about it. Because I think some kind of this is a real mystery, the only one I know. This is the thing that you hope exists and assume doesn't if you're a reasonable person. Because it's that, you know, all the dreams of childhood, all the sense of magic and the dissolvability and transcendability of boundaries is returned, is affirmed in this experience. Well, yet here we are having this on the brink of a planetary meltdown of culture and ecosystem. So is this just some kind of dancing on the brink? Is it kind of ultimate self-indulgence? Does it feed back into the central moral problem of the age, which is what is to be done? What are we to do? How can we be effective, whatever that means? Is there a discernible role for each of us to play in the metamorphosis and near death of the planet that we are now experiencing? Or are we simply to witness it? Well, I don't think there's any point in thinking about these kinds of questions unless you draw back to the big picture, to first premises, to a good example of what I mean is, suppose we save the rainforests and stabilize the population and so forth and so on, and then 50 years down the line, the sun explodes. It means we didn't get it. We were not reading correctly the message nature was trying to hand to us. And so we did the wrong thing and are going to be blown out of the water for such churlishness. So what's important is to figure out what is going on before you start pushing in the process. And I don't think you can do it from within a culture. In other words, if you're a person of decent intent and moderate intelligence, and you read the great minds of your culture and study their thought, it's insufficient because everybody is bound within an illusion of language. The entire enterprise of culture is this illusion of language. Homer was as sick with it as Heidegger, so there's no going back or getting, no classic recension. What we have to do is reach past to some kind of experience. It must be anchored in an experience. But there is this thing about being human, which we as a culture have ignored, repressed, don't want to talk about, face, or think about, which is you can get loaded. And nobody knows quite what to make of this. We dance around it with the same kind of furious, ambiguous intensity that we also reserve for sex, which is also a boundary dissolving, momentary loss of self into some kind of greater whole. And it also just drives us into a frenzy. We establish boundaries, we have hierarchies, we push it this way and that. It just drives us up the wall. You know, whoever she was who designed this system had the good sense to connect this whole sexual impulse very tightly into the generative process, so that there's no way you can get sex out of the human experience. I mean, people have tried in all times and places in many strange ways. 150 years ago, they were putting pants on pianos because it was thought that young men should not see pianos unclothed because it might excite them to impure thoughts. And this is real. In England, in our culture, not New Guinea or the moon, but in England, pianos wore pants. But the psychedelic option is sort of like an appendix. You know, you can have it, but you don't need it, apparently. Apparently. That's the key thing. In other words, whether or not you have the psychedelic experience does not stand between you and the ability to pass on your genes into time. It does not stand between you and continued existence like the autonomic reflex of breathing. It's a kind of potential loop in development, which we can, as culturally coordinated creatures, choose to follow or choose not to follow. But this development is very recent. Until, pick a number, 10,000 years ago, the onset of puberty, which was, you know, a wave of hormonal release, basically, the onset of puberty was the signal to the social mechanisms of the people to begin the administration of psychedelic plants, to carry people into adulthood, to carry them into a feeling-toned relationship with the mythological material that they had learned as children, but that they now would be expected to exemplify as realized adults within the lung or shud culture or whatever it is that they are. We, in our anxiety about all this, and I'll talk about why I'm sure it will come out, but for the present, just to say, we have interfered with this, and we have enforced upon ourselves a kind of infantilism. Now, this is a phenomenon that's well known. It's called neoteny. Neoteny is the preservation of adult characteristics into adulthood. Childhood characteristics or infantile characteristics, or even fetal characteristics. So, for instance, all primate fetuses are hairless, but only the human being retains this fetal characteristic throughout life. The very large head of the human infant, the percentage relationship to body mass remains very much in the fetal end of the statistics throughout life for human beings. We have large heads. The very prolonged period in which cultural skills are acquired, up to 16 years. Well, this tendency toward biological neoteny, which was reinforced by mutagenic influences in the diet, is carried over into culture as a cultural characteristic. And have you noticed that every generation views the generation it spawns as more childish than itself? And we look back to our rugged grandparents who slogged across the plains, and I suppose they look back to people in chainmail who were only 4 feet high, who, you know, could go without eating for 6 months or something. And it just gets, we have become more and more soft, more and more infantile, And the final phase of this was just the decision that we never needed to grow up at all. We never needed to find out about the nature of our relationship to being at all. And so the psychedelics were suppressed. And what you have in the pre-adolescent child is an extreme expression of ego. And this is, the 11-year-old child, let's take as the example, is the supreme egoist. And in a sense, we got hung up at that place because we didn't get hung up in it. We fell into it. We were imbalanced, but the suppression of psychedelics created the precondition that allowed the generation of ego. And it's very complicated. A lot of factors were at work, you see. The mushroom style, the shamanic style of the nomadic hunter-gatherer is a style of goddess worship and psychedelic shamanism and orgiastic religion. And shamanism and the religion overlap each other considerably. The style that replaced that was a style of domination, hierarchy, with alpha males, with powerful males controlling females at the center of these hierarchies. And to my mind, the concern that caused the shift was the accumulation in the psyche of these hominids of enough ego that there became concern for the line of male paternity. In other words, men wanted to know who their children were. And that made the orgiastic style of religion in conflict, because that was all about, the children were the children of the group. And sex was a shared activity, even though there might be bonding. But once men got it into their heads that they wanted to know who their offspring were, then females had to be controlled very rigidly, and there had to be control of sexual. And the whole thing just turned into a nightmare. My women, my property, my children, my food, my territory, so on and so forth. Well, you see, what had been going on before was a true incipient symbiosis. And this is the new idea that I want to communicate, and that I'm absolutely, one, serious about, and two, literal about, that our glory and our uniqueness and why we are as we are is because we are a plant-animal symbiotic species. Our ordinary state, our state of nature, the way in which we existed until 10,000 years ago, was in a very tightly bound symbiotic relationship with plants. They were, we domesticated them, and we spread them, and we created environments for them through the use of burning. And in return for this mysterious connection opened up, where real information couched in humanly cognizable terms, information about where the reindeer went, who you should marry, what the weather's gonna do, stuff like that. Real information began to be traded back and forth. Now, biologists are familiar with the notion of pheromones, message-bearing chemicals that regulate behavior within a species. But we're just getting ready to go to the next level.
Okay.
And recognize the possibility
Trying to think of anything else that needs to be done to it right now through the street lamps in last minute there. I think that'll make a nice light source once I light them up.
It's very clear
And nice little
that,
lines
in
bending,
climax
looming into the
ecosystems
street,
of great
as most of the
age,
buildings have the
such
same sort of
as the
looming
equatorial
quality.
tropics of this
I
planet,
was unfortunately not able to fit in the clouds
exopheromonal
that I captured in the first one, which were a fairly large portion of the composition. position. But the first one was
the
also
old notion
taller,
of competition and survival of the
vertically,
fittest is now seen
and
to
more
be
pinched, more
bankrupt.
narrow.
The way
More like a
nature
comic book
works is
style of
it's the
composition.
species that
So it
can
had more
make
room for
itself
clouds,
most
and this one I don't know if I'm
necessary
going to be able to
to
fit them
other
in.
species.
I
The one
like
that
the
can
open
cut
yellow,
energy
lemon yellow
deals with the
brightness
most
of the
its
sky and the
neighbors
light
that
that I
is the
will
successful one. So you maximize
shortly be
cooperation,
developing
you
on
maximize
top of that.
dependency,
It
you
will be sort of
maximize
the
integration. This is the
bright
successful
background
evolutionary
casting the
strategy.
shadows into the
I
foreground,
mean, of course you can be
which
a
is starting to
jaguar
develop
and
a little
crash
bit,
around
but
the forest and eat things immediately.
long way to go.
smaller than
So
you.
we'll see what
But,
happens next with it. I think I'm going to leave it at
jaguars
there,
would be
let
in
it
the
set up
memory in the
for
fossil
now. Thank you
record
for
of
watching.
this
That's
planet
Adam
when
Sturch
the plants
broadcasting from the
still
Mushroom Mansion,
exist,
Taos, New
given,
Mexico,
that man
working
were
on
not
oil
part
painting
of the
Death of a
picture.
Salesman.
So,
Have a good day, Ruth.